Throughout the 1990s, there were a handful of toys created that upon release caused parents to let out a collective groan of annoyance because they just knew that their kids were going to throw a massive tantrum if they didn't find it under the Christmas tree on Christmas morning. Of all of these fad toys, however, only one has the dubious honor of being officially banned from the NSA out of fear it had the ability to learn and share any juicy government secrets that it learned. We are, of course, talking about the Furby. For those unfamiliar, it's important to point out how insane people got during the 1990s when it came to buying and selling the various toys that were in during that decade. Partly because it adds some kind of necessary context to the kind of marketing atmosphere the Furby was released into, but also because it's really bizarre and funny, and the past was weird. By far the most well-known example of 90s collective toy-induced psychosis arose as a result of Beanie Babies. Small, bean-filled, colorful animals originally designed to serve as what's known in the industry as a pocket money toy, essentially a small, relatively inexpensive toy intended to be bought as either a child with their own money, hence the name, or as a reward for the child not throwing a temper tantrum in Walmart or something. However, due to a combination of savvy marketing on behalf of creator Ty Warner and a concerted effort from speculators who organized using at the time nascent internet marketplaces like eBay, people went crazy for the things, and the stuff Ty Warner did to sell Beanie Babies is quite literally the sort of thing that they now teach in business textbooks. Most notably, Warner would micromanage the crap out of deliveries of Beanie Babies, making sure to split runs of specific beanies between different markets to give the illusion of both scarcity and a surplus depending on which market you happen to be in. By doing this with every run of the product, Warner ensured that when Beanie Babies arrived in stores, wherever that store was located, there'd always be one Beanie Baby in the bunch that looked rarer than the others. This encouraged collectors to beeline towards that specific beanie, thinking it was a limited edition or something, when in reality there were probably like 40,000 sitting on shelves just one state over. Warner was also keenly aware of the fact that speculators were reselling Beanie Babies for many times their original price on places like eBay, and used information that was gleaned from the site and things like newsletters from collecting groups to inform his sales strategy and even to predict the end of the fad and bow out with a massive profit rather than being stuck holding the bag. For anyone curious, he did this by announcing a particularly popular beanie was no longer going to be manufactured and checking the price of said beanie on eBay. When the price didn't rise all that much, Warner knew that Beanie Mania was over and set about ramping up marketing for the next fad he'd invested in, something he was able to do fairly easily thanks to the fact that he'd struck a deal with most stores wanting to stock Beanie Babies, wherein they also had to buy and stock other toys his company made. A deal few stores turned down due to the massive popularity of Beanie Babies. For the resellers, some simply made out like Beanie Bandits do, due to the massive speculators market that existed for beanies, most of which was informed by a handful of people who ran things like newsletters or forums dedicated to buying and reselling the toys. None of these speculators had any real information about which, if any, beanies were actually valuable, and many of the beanies they singled out as being the one people had to buy like right now because it was about to shoot up in price and pay for the kids' college ended up being the ones the speculators themselves had just bought a bunch of, which must have been rather convenient for them. In addition to, at one point, constituting a quantifiable percentage of all sales on eBay, Beanie Babies caused a not insignificant number of fistfights in McDonald's across America when the chain struck a deal with Thai Inc. to include miniature Beanie Babies inside of Happy Meals. Again, Ty Warner ensured that the beanies included in Happy Meals were shipped to McDonald's in irregular quantities to give the illusion of rarity and fuel the speculators' market. This, coupled with McDonald's at the time policy of only including a random toy with every Happy Meal rather than a specific one, saw people queuing up for hours to buy dozens of Happy Meals just to sift through them for whatever beanies they didn't have and then dump the food on the floor. Anyone who's ever worked in customer service can probably imagine how irate people got when they didn't get the specific beanie they wanted, and fights as well as robberies were reported in McDonald's across the country. A couple of savvy McDonald's employees also managed to make themselves some money by snatching the supposedly rarer beanies for themselves and selling them directly to the customer. Speaking of violence, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the release of Tickle Me Elmo in 1996, which saw store workers literally being trampled by parents trying to get their hands on one, all as a direct result of Rosie O'Donnell, which again is a story for another day. And finally, we can't not mention the release of the Turbo Man action figure, coincidentally also in 1996, which saw at least one desperate parent call in a bomb threat at a radio station and another crash a Christmas parade in a jetpack dressed like the character character where he got into a fistfight with Sinbad dressed like a Power Rangers reject. We told you the past was weird, and as someone who lived their formative years through this, let's just say it's just the tip of the iceberg. You think the internet has weird rumors? How about a 1990s-era major news report in Seattle going into depth as to why a certain percentage of the population could hear a strange ringing sound while the rest of the humans in Seattle couldn't? If you thought at any point they suggested that it was simple tinnitus, you'd be wrong, and instead the journalists involved went into significant effort to track the ringing down to its source, which they decided was probably industrial in nature, but could never figure it out. And don't even get started on the spontaneous combustion fad where humans were apparently randomly dying via their bodies suddenly bursting into flames out of nowhere that was constantly reported in the news as a real thing. The 1990s, everybody. Alright, getting back to Furby and toys, the release of this fuzzy electronic companion in 1998 similarly saw violence erupt across the states due to a combination of feverish demand and stocking issues. In one case, a furious Furby-inspired melee erupted in a Massachusetts Walmart when customers learned that the store only had 30 of the toy in stock. In another Walmart, this time in Illinois, 2 people were injured in a stampede of customers desperate to get their hands on one. We could go on, but the stories start to get samey after a while, and weirdly, Walmart fistfights are the least interesting thing about the initial release of this toy. After all, it's Walmart. Just another day at the office, really. In any event, designed by 2 guys called Dave Hampton and Caleb Chung, with Hampton coming up with the initial idea and programming the electronics and Chung designing the mechanical aspects of the toy, the Furby was seen as a natural evolution of the idea birthed by another popular fad toy, the Tamagotchi. That idea being a digital pet kids could care for. However, unlike the Tamagotchi, which required constant care and could even die if not properly looked after, their pet would live forever. It would also be largely indifferent to both abuse and neglect, both of which Hampton saw as being something the toy would naturally be subjected to when it was placed in the care of a small child. The toy was also designed to be decidedly more cute and cuddly than a small brick of beeping plastic, opting to give their creation giant eyes and ears as well as a high-pitched cutesy voice. As Hampton would note in a later interview, the fatal flaw of the Tamagotchi, as popular as it was, is that you couldn't pet it, something he corrected by covering his toy in soft, huggable fur, which, fun fact, is the inspiration for the toy's name, with Furby being a contraction of fur ball, the toy's working name during the design phase. However, the real selling point of the Furby wasn't how soft and fuzzy it was, but its purported ability to learn. Now, exactly what capabilities the original Furby had have been subject to embellishment over the years, and to this day you can find anecdotal stories across the web from people who insist that their Furby did something it was absolutely not programmed to do, or responded to stimulus in a way that suggested rudimentary intelligence. In fact, we found stories from people who claimed, among other things, that their Furby spoke without batteries or said their name in the dead of night without prompting. We even found one person who blamed the toy for nearly killing their boyfriends. The internet, everybody. This story of potential Furbicide comes from Jacqueline Dole of Maine, who recounted to The Independent how her childhood Furby was found in an old shed, subsequently left on the backseat of her car when she couldn't muster the heart to toss it in the garbage. According to Dole, the Furby inexplicably sprung to life after 2 decades of inactivity when her boyfriend was driving to work at 4 a.m. This nearly caused him to crap his pants and crash the car in what we assume was that order. In truth, however, much like the humans we read with some of these fantastical stories, the Furby was a relatively dumb device that was made to appear smart thanks to a quite ingenious bit of programming. You see, the Furby had no ability to learn and could only respond to very limited stimuli, namely light, sound, and touch, from a vocabulary of about 200 words and phrases. Some sources claim Furbies had a vocabulary bigger than this, but it's unclear if this includes the numerous nonsense phrases it was programmed with. But here's the really clever part. These words and phrases included a bunch of gibberish baby talk described in marketing as Furbish. Upon being turned on, a Furby would be programmed to only respond to stimuli with phrases and words in this made-up language. Supposedly, the language does make sense, and fans of the toy claim to have been able to decipher its meaning. We even found a fan-made English to Furbish translator out there for anyone who cares enough to want to play around with it. However, according to Hampton, Furbish doesn't really mean anything and was merely an amalgam of all the languages he'd picked up during his time as an electronics engineer in the Navy. Basically, Furbish is designed to be reminiscent of the babbling of a baby, with all meaning derived from the gibberish being the result of people simply hearing what they want to hear, which which is presumably why we found countless stories of people insisting that their Furby learned to swear. This said, later Furbies were shipped with a more advanced vocabulary, which has allowed fans to approximate meaning and intent from some Furbish terms. There's also been a handful of marketing materials released over the years, featuring proper translations of Furbish phrases and words from which people have similarly extrapolated further meaning. Likewise, at least according to Hampton, some Furbish words do have direct translations. For example, da in Furbish means big and is inspired by the word for that in Mandarin. In any event, after a predetermined amount of time, a given Furby would begin to pepper in words or phrases in either English or one of the other 20 programmed languages so it could speak. In another very savvy move, Hampton chose words and phrases that the toy was most statistically likely to hear during regular play, such as hello, which the toy could then randomly begin to say after being awoken a certain number of times. The thinking being that most children would start any play session with their toy by saying hello. To be clear, the Furby couldn't understand anything being said to it and had no ability to record, recall, or remember. Its audio sensor would simply detect if noise was happening and respond with a random phrase in either Furbish, English, or a garbled combination of the two based on how long it had been turned on. As alluded to, a Furby would similarly begin its life responding to stimuli with pre-programmed nonsense phrases before seemingly learning the correct term for what it was experiencing. For example, a Furby might say da e lo utai, which according to a Furbish to English translator means big light up, when, say, the curtains were opened the first thing in the morning. After experiencing this enough times, though, the Furby would begin instead to say good morning. In addition, to better sell that it was a living, breathing creature, a Furby was also programmed with a bunch of all-purpose phrases and responses it could say in more general situations. These included snoring sounds when it couldn't detect any light after a significant amount of time, or even a sneeze. This, coupled with the fact that a Furby could never technically be turned off, only coaxed to go to sleep by placing it in a darkened room, is presumably why so many parents and children insisted that Furbies were far smarter and more aware of their surroundings than they actually were. It's also why the toy could seemingly awake after years or decades of slumber, since the sensors used to detect light, sound, and touch, likewise, never actually turned off, so if there was still enough juice in the batteries, it could do its thing. But in any event, this is all presumably what caused the NSA to collectively crap themselves when parents began bringing these things into work with them. Specifically, it's reported that shortly after the toy was released, several government agencies, most notably the NSA, banned the toy from their offices and buildings out of fear it possessed the ability to record information and potentially even repeat said information at a later date when prompted, proving that it's not just stupid people who were taken in by the creator of the toy's tricks. And it gets better, because a detail about this story that's often left out in retellings is that the NSA didn't just think the Furbies could record information. For a time, they thought they were highly advanced AI spy bots. To explain, in classified documents from 1999 that have since been declassified, an unnamed NSA agent raised concerns about a device with an artificial intelligent chip on board that allowed it to learn and repeat any language spoken in its vicinity. Something we feel compelled to mention about the document is that they also refer to the Furby, literally the hottest toy in the United States at the time, as a Fropy. Understandably, newspapers at the time were all over this and tapped as many of their anonymous sources as they could for further information about the ban, which revealed, among other things, that it was a genuine concern of security officials that Furbies would randomly start sharing classified information with children. In an agency-wide memo, employees were reminded that, quote, personally owned photographic, video, and audio recording equipment are prohibited items. This includes toys such as Furbies, with built-in recorders that repeat the audio with synthesized sound to mimic the original signal. With the memo further advising anyone who brought a Furby to work to contact a security officer for guidance on what to do next. As for the fate of these suspected spy Furbies, to quote the BBC from a contemporary article, the fate of any Furbies uncovered at the NSA is as yet unknown, presumed top secret. While the ban from NSA-controlled headquarters is well documented, it's unclear how many other governing agencies similarly banned them, though it stands to reason that if the NSA banned something, they'd probably pass along their advice to other agencies with similarly strict security. In the end, the company that sold the toy, Tiger Electronics, a subsidiary of Hasbro, finally issued a statement gently chiding the NSA for not employing due diligence to determine the capabilities of the toy. This statement, credited to one Roger Schiffman, the owner of Tiger Electronics at the time, read in part, although Furby is a clever toy, it does not record or mimic voices. The NSA did not do their homework. Furby is not a spy. Or so they want us to believe. Furby creator David Hampton even briefly came out of hiding to show that the microphone inside the Furby couldn't record or even understand human speech, perceiving all noise as a series of repetitive beeps to which it would respond with one of the aforementioned predetermined responses. Also, yes, we did say that David Hampton was in hiding at the time because, according to a 1998 interview with him following the success of the toy, he'd moved to an undisclosed location in the forests of Tahoe so that parents looking to buy a Furby couldn't harass him. Humans, everybody. Ultimately, the ban was lifted when the agency sheepishly admitted to overestimating the capabilities of the toy, by which point the fad was largely over and everyone had moved on to the next hot thing. Thanks for watching.